If you're not struggling with sleep, you don't ever feel like you need more rest, or there isn't an element of exhaustion in your life, then you're probably in the minority, because most of us experience this to some extent in our modern lifestyles. And in this episode, we are meeting Tim Thomas, a man who is really deeply passionate about supporting others in restoring themselves to great rest. The conversation that we moved through touched some really deep levels. Why it is that we fear rest, and what it is that's required to move past that fear of rest, with some super simple tools that he and I both love to share that can help you drop into accessing that place of rest and moving through the fears that keep you held in those patterns of exhaustion and restlessness. Tim is a former professional fighter and special forces soldier. He spent over a decade working with veterans, professionals, athletes, and everyday people to improve sleep, resilience, and nervous system health. He's survived PTSD, pharmaceutical addiction, alcohol addiction, and a family breakdown. Along the way, he's raised over $1.3 million for charities close to the heart and founded his company, Breathwork in Bed, a platform focused on natural and immediate sleep improvement. Tim's work sits between the lived experience of mental health, simple human practices that actually work. And his mission is straightforward: better sleep, better humans, and a better world. I hope that you enjoy this conversation and really tune in to the feeling that was between the two of us, along with our own ahas. Allow your heart to listen. I am really excited and honoured to be bringing you Tim Thomas today, who is someone that I actually personally connected with a few years ago, sharing our passion for breathwork and how it supports our healing journey. And he has taken the courage to join us in the Facing Fears series, which I'm really intrigued about what he's going to bring because of his personal story. And I wanted to ask him on a slightly different note. When he reached out to me about being on the podcast, one of the things he mentioned was loving my yoga nidras. And it always surprises me when people say, I love your yoga nidras, because part of my brain thinks no one listens to them. It's amazing to me when someone says, I listen. And I know that when I first came to a yoga nidra, I had just received the trauma of my brain injury. And so I was needing something to help me find rest in the trauma that my body was very much living through. And I really took to very specific forms of yoga nidra that I felt were gentle enough for my nervous system and my body, my mind, my whole energy system, not just a nervous system, the whole energetic being could connect to. And I'm very aware that my yoga nidras are not necessarily the kind of trauma-informed way of doing things. And I am intrigued, Tim, as to your journey of yoga nidra before we get into the breath, and what it is that you found with yoga nidra has been so helpful to your journey.
Nid, I feel like I'm meeting you for the first time. And I know we met in 2021, but that was, in my view of it, that was like the Clark Kent version of Nid. I didn't know your superpowers. And so for the last few years, when I actually got into that world of how your spoken word could go into those really deep places. And that's no small thing, because, having come through a bit of PTSD post special forces, nobody tells the psychologist that the trauma goes down deeper than the words can reach. And so they're blah, blah, blahing, but it's just always falling short of the targets they want to hit. But for your spoken word to go into those places, I found that to be, well, it's hard to even speak about the parts of us that don't have words or language. Um, and how did that show up in my life? Well, at 2 a.m. when I needed something to put me back into a rested state, and I'm a pretty tough physical dude. I was a former professional fighter before Special Forces. So to have something that actually gets past my own fight, because that's how, like, if you think of personality types, I'm sort of in the there's king, lover, magician, warrior. I'm kind of in the warrior realm, and so to actually get past my uh, warrior state of fight, because I tell myself if I drop my guard for a second, something bad's going to happen. It's going to be my fault, so I don't drop my guard. So to have access to those deep restorative parts was such a gift. And access to a whole other energy realm. So I kind of see energy like a tree, right? So a tree has their branches in the sun. And I thought creating energy was about putting more leaves in the sun and never letting the sun go down. But guess what happens when the sun doesn't go down? It burns out the leaves, right? So to go into that root system, that unseen system, it was so complementary because I'd access that realm through breath, but to have it through the spoken word was a whole other thing. So that's why I was kind of super excited because I feel like saying I'm so excited to meet this lady, not because I hadn't met you before, but now I've got an awareness of your, I guess, Superman side. So I'm like, I kind of have to contain myself. I feel like I'm a bit of a fanboy, if you know what I mean.
Thank you, Tim. And I really recognize that the key is the state, right, that we can drop into. And one of the key things that my yoga nidra teacher taught me that really stood and stands in everything that I do, not just yoga nidras, but in all my work, is can't take people somewhere if you've not been there before and know how to do it safely. And so although I know that some of my practices can have strong visuals, that can be triggering. And I use that intentionally, right? Because we need to awaken the pieces that we're sometimes avoiding. And that's why I say, I know I'm not always trauma informed because you're not always going to feel safe, just safe. But that's because life isn't just safe. We need to know how to drop into the safety, but from safety, move through what it is. And so for me, my practice is, I have to drop into it to take people there. And I think that there's something so important about these unseen realms that you're touching on that are purely, an energetic feeling resonance.
Yeah, well, I think before us humans were putting paintings on rock walls, before we were sentient, before we were speaking, we had a nervous system, and it's ancient and it was there before we were thinking and speaking. And that's where some of this stuck energy gets stuck. So it's hard to reach a place that existed before we were speaking. But when you've been to that energetic space and come through it, then you have a chance of going back to that place, breaking someone's isolation, and then moving them through what they need to get to. Because I think a lot of people get so much connection from feeling like they're not alone, and that's important, but you can't leave it there. Veterans are really good at creating what I call these antisocial social groups. It's powerful to feel like other humans are in the same situation, but you've got to cross that bridge to where you need to get healing. And often, I call a bridge to healing a trigger, because that's the stuff that's keeping you locked down. or in the mythology realm, you have that the in front of the cave of gold is the fire-breathing dragon, and the fire-breathing dragon is your triggers, the thing that you think are going to eat you and burn you alive. But on the other side of that is the most rewarding, thing ever. So these days, whenever I'm getting triggered, it's just, to me, it's a tripwire. It pops up a sign saying this is the direction you need to go. Um, and once you can, and it's not that I don't get triggered, but I can catch myself earlier now, because that's my path to sovereignty. This is my path to the mature version of Tim.
Yeah,
And it
that's
takes a lot
beautifully
of courage to cross those bridges, because they're kind of unique.
said. Well, and it takes different skills and different tools with different bridges, right? Not every bridge is the same approach, because it's bringing up whatever the different coping strategies, the different nervous system responses, the different life experiences are, right, that we've had that have led us to stay on that side. And I think in being triggered, and like I say, I slightly throw it in there on purpose, because, I follow that same piece of, I want to proactively pursue where I'm triggered from a place of safety. So if I can drop into a safe place and then allow that trigger to move up, I'm doing it consciously and I'm choosing to open myself to it. And then what can happen is that sometimes life serves it to me in a more literal way, and I have to engage in it, hopefully now from that place where I've practiced it in the comfort of my own practices and tools. And my intuition can open up what the steps are, right, that I might need to take to get over the bridge. But I want to just tap back into your point around veterans and kind of community, and how community can actually, be seeming to take us forwards, but actually can hold us back. And I'd love it if you could share a little bit more around that, because I don't think that's just veterans. I think that's a lot of human community.
Yeah, and when I share from the veteran space, please understand that we're humans and we have very similar human experiences, but sometimes it's good to sort of have a very acutely messed up form of humans to find out those universal truths. So veterans are normal humans, but they've often had the blessing of having extreme senses of fatigue, extreme senses of social isolation, and it just, to me, has made a very good observation point. So when we talk about isolation and the power of breaking it, but also doing it wrong, to me, I've got nothing against alcohol, but if you can't be with someone and not drink, there's something there that's stopping you from really connecting. The principle I run off is we're as powerful as we are connected. And it's a bit of a pseudo isolation breaker when I've met a bunch of people. Let's just say, for example, I have a particular idea about a particular group of people, and I really don't like that group of people. And I meet someone who really doesn't like that group of people. And all of a sudden, we've sort of built this sort of dome of connection around a common enemy. But that is an antisocial social group, because, I can only feel like I can be myself around that person. And the rest of the time, I'm like, well, I've just got to keep it inside. Veterans, we tend to have come from a similar background. So we're in that space, and people are saying, yeah, this thing pissed me off and that thing pissed me off. And Department of Veteran Affairs, that was actually a banned subject in my veteran men's group. You couldn't talk about the Department of Veteran Affairs because, that was the compensation thing. And there was so much negative space around that the whole group would then implode on all these negative stories. So the picture I had in my head was that any kind of group needed to be like a trampoline. You go into it and you leave with more momentum to then go to be yourself more in the external world. And then you return and then leave with more energy. So the way I created that was, firstly, sober engagement. And secondly, I was always aware of when the sun was going down, and I'd have us meeting about an hour before the sun went down, and I'd have everyone, no chairs, deliberately standing. And so people would sort of move around the place. And as the sun went down, those colors of light would then naturally, effortlessly release all these, okay, it's time to go into the cave, produce melatonin, and they would naturally then start gravitating around the fire. Again, all standing. But then we would sit down to eat. So we had an enjoyable experience eating communally, and then would circle up these chairs, and I would have someone sharing their story about what they went through. And the positive point of isolation breaking happened when I could see it happening in the audience. Their jaw would pop open, they'd drop the F-bomb, and then they'd say, I thought I was the only one. Because I've noticed men especially, we tend to think that if we ask for help, we're weak, and if we're weak, we'll let the team down, and I'll die before I let the team down. But and those unspoken words become like rocks around your heart. They don't just hurt, they stop you feeling and connecting. And so what we're just dying to hear is for another man to say those words that we can't say, and that then dissolves the rocks around your heart. Thought I was the only one. And then that was the healthiest way in a sober environment on that natural progression when it was just happening. They didn't even know it was happening. It was just a natural thing. But then to me, I wasn't being responsible if I just left it at isolation breaking, because when you're alone and isolated, you're often fatigued. Because if I'm the only one that's got my back, I can't drop my guard for a second. If I drop my guard, something bad's going to happen. And so guess what? Not sleeping. And so, quality sleep, and this is why I pay close attention to your work, is the soil from which everything grows. Yeah. If someone's not sleeping, you could have the best psychologist, psychiatrist, men's group. You've poisoned the soil. And so I noticed that if we could break the isolation, if we could get them out of fatigue, so all the programs I set up, the success metric was of how much sleep was improved. And that's a very measurable metric. And we noticed that if we could do those two things, this inner knowing came out of them. It's like their own internal compass switched on. Or if you could say you went from your amygdala, your fight or flight, which is fast but kind of dumb, to your prefrontal cortex, your higher thinking. It's like sending a satellite up in the sky where you can see it all, you can be with it all, and you got a whole lot more options because you can see it from a higher perspective. And in my observation, the modern medical system is only dealing with the problems that happen as a result of feeling lonely and the fatigue. And so once those two blockages were removed, it's like their natural, energetic, divinely connected signature came out, and they knew what to do next. And I'll say this because this was a real thing. We had a lifetime goal of saving 40 veteran lives from suicide. And with those two things that I just mentioned, that goal was achieved within 12 months.
Amazing. That is really amazing. And it just shows the power of something so simple as well, like you say, of making it a sober gathering. And also what for me really rings in everything you shared so far is facing the fear of letting down the guard, the protective front that needs to stay alive, that needs to keep up the team, keep the tribe going, keep the fight against the bad guys. It keeps the divisiveness operational. And by opening a space for people to share in a genuinely vulnerable way, it helps everyone else shed those layers of the guard, which sheds the fight, which sheds the divisiveness, and that opens up that intuitive guidance of wholeness that remembers that we're all beings, we're all human beings with the same experiences, that there's no side, right? And therefore there's the capacity to move forwards, choosing yourself, that also remembers that everyone else benefits when you choose from a place of care and love for yourself.
Nid, you just said such a mouthful there. And it's funny, a lot of these guys, and I'll just use the veteran as a reference, and they're a particular personality type, so it's not one size fits all. But I will say with the veterans, you know, they got no problem facing what some people would be really fearful of, going out and getting shot at. And, you know, there is an amount of fear with that, but we're built for that and we're familiar with that. What we're not familiar with is being gentle with ourselves. What we're definitely not familiar with is being vulnerable. So it's actually quite triggering for that sort of warrior archetype to drop their guard, because they have in their mind that it's the safety of the village. Someone's going to die if I drop my guard and I become vulnerable, because the enemy will see me as weak. But this is where the greatest fear, the greatest triggers, the greatest reward, the biggest dragon behind the biggest cave of gold is for this particular, you know, archetype, and modeling that gentleness. Because it is too much of a stretch to go, okay, let's just be vulnerable. That's not going to happen, right? So to have that ease of access to then get to that space, which in some ways you do really well in those yoga nidra meditations, that gentle access where you go through the whole body, because my physical body will maintain a belief system I've got in my head. And if that gets challenged, my body will go tense, reinforce that and go, you're not going near there, you know, and it just creates this, nothing's getting in. So to actually dissolve all that very gently allows you to open those parts that can only be accessed through vulnerability, to then allow your mature nature to be accessed, which means ultimately having to cross those bridges of triggers. Yeah.
And I mean, I personally sit in the warrior archetype, because that's why I was an advocate as a lawyer, right? You know, because I found myself, before I was a lawyer, in the dance industry, speaking up for people, being a representative for the group of dancers. And so I had that archetype, and I had that natural ease of standing up and saying, this is not right. Like, I will not. And so again, like I had to find that letting go, that dropping into ease, that allowing myself to feel open enough to start to move through things in a gentle way was so much a part of my healing journey as well. And I sense that because so much of our society is built on the war paradigm, to be honest, even as a lawyer, the legal system from England, which has been, spread globally, the common law system that we created in England, which also is used as the foundation for a lot of commercial legal deals for our economic system across the world, is based on conflict. It's based on one person's right, the other person's wrong, and we have to come and argue and fight it out until someone says, you fought better than you did, and therefore you win. So everything is founded upon fight. And so it's within all of our systems, how capitalism is even based, because that's the legal structure behind the deals that are done, that we're all in a fight or flight. A fight mode, to be honest, not even really a flight. If you're in flight, you're kind of trying to be
we
out
cannot
of the
lose.
system.
And that is like, yeah.
And that's everyone. So even if it's not your default pattern to be a warrior, you're forced into a warrior system by the way that you have to live in our society, by the fact that you have to work so hard to make the money, to have to live in probably accommodation you can't afford to live in because property prices are too high, right? There's this whole structure of being forced to live in a feeling like you're constantly fighting to survive. You know, the amount of people who fight to make enough money to buy food and clothes every week for their kids, you know, and this is in like our nice privileged societies. So there is this energy that even if it's not your default pattern that you're forced to live in, that you're talking to when you're talking about the warrior archetype and what the veterans have to go through. They're, like you say, the extreme example of our society. That's the acute situation, but it's actually prevalent throughout the paradigm that we're living in. And so I think it's actually a really important conversation to be looking at facing the fear of what would seem like might take you to dropping out of the system.
Yeah, you said something really interesting there, and being dyslexic, I see things in patterns. And first up, I think I know why I get your the way you do your meditations, because I feel like I'm speaking to a fellow warrior archetype. But secondly, when you were talking about the living in fear, and you know, we are what we marinate in. And I tend to think the marinade we currently live in loves it when we're living in our amygdala, when we're living in our fight or flight, because then we're more easily manipulated. We believe dumb shit when we shouldn't. There's a whole lot of stuff that happens when we're in our amygdala that we just take for granted because everyone's doing it, right? So would it be true to say that moving from your amygdala, your fight or flight, into your prefrontal cortex, your higher thinking, that everyone has a unique set of triggers, fears that until they address, they're always going to be in their amygdala, their fight or flight?
Yeah. Yeah. Because how can you move on from a state of being? Because it's a state of being to be in fight and flight. Like to be stuck in your amygdala, fine, we can intellectualize it, stick it in a part of the brain, but it's a state of being.
Yeah.
That you're stuck in when you're stuck in that response. And what we're doing with Yoga Nidra is shifting the state of being, right, to one that knows the restfulness, which allows the consciousness of using the prefrontal cortex. Again, a label, right? Like, is it really the prefrontal cortex or is it something more than that? So we're shifting state of being. And to me, it's why there's such a prevalence of insomnia and sleep issues around the world, and therefore mental health that goes with that and the consequences of that, because we're stuck in a state of being where we don't know what rest actually is. And rest is not about sleep. The state of rest is the state that we go about life, where we are calm, we have the equanimity to see complex situations, and that means that we can open up to compassion for different divisive viewpoints, and therefore we can hold the healing of some of those limiting patterns. So there's a journey back and forth between these two states, right? Which is the oscillation of the nervous system, potential, you know, that we might experience of being able to be in a stressful situation, but hold it in calm, you know, to not be reactive to, oh my God, so-and-so just did that again, whoever that is, right? And oh, that's going to happen, so therefore I'm going to catastrophize the following 5 years of my life. You know, there's many ways that we can get stuck in the pattern. But to me, it really is, and this is what Yoga Nidra really taught me, was it's a state of being. And I learned to transfer how I experience Yoga Nidra to drop into that feeling state as I go about life. And that was really important shift, was to recognize that the state of restfulness in a Yoga Nidra is something I can access while I'm awake. I don't need to be asleep. It's not that it helps me sleep. It's that it helps me be more restful in my life and therefore less reactive.
Well, I think that's one certainly feeds the other. If I look at my day and see how much I'm getting triggered, I'll see how much energy I'm wasting on those triggers. And there's only so much energy. So if I'm wasting 70% of my triggers and I just think it's normal, then life is hard at 30%. And I tell myself life is hard. And in the past, I've noticed the economy loves it when we're fatigued because it gives us this dopamine to pour over dysfunction. Alcohol, drugs, all these sort of easy fixes that are like short-term loans, but then you end up further in debt, and the cycle continues. But when you're talking about shifting states, the image I had in my mind was how, have you ever had the thing where, I don't need a holiday, I don't need time off, but then when you take that time, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know how much I needed that. Oh my gosh. And that's kind of us on the daily,
Yeah, that's a really good example, is the not taking the break, right? And also saying, I only need 4 days if I'm going to take a break. Not, oh no, you really needed 2 weeks, right? You really need like the first week to unwind, the second week to actually relax and to realize, the state of tension that you're operating in at all times.
Because when that state locks us in, it's 100% 360. We do not doubt our own truth. And I like to think that I kind of treat my mind like a garden. Whatever I water grows. And for years, I was watering the stress weeds, and they don't just take up your energy. It's like eyeballs pop out of these stress weeds and they become sentient. They become aware of the things that feed them, aware of the things that you do that feed them, and aware of the things that you do that starve them. And what's an easy example of this? Like before you do some kind of physical exercise, there's always a part of you going, no, let's not do this now. I don't want to do it. Let's do it later, because they're the disempowered parts of you, knowing that once you become physically empowered, they get kicked out. And they scream the loudest before they die. Some might even call that a trigger. The parts of us that know that if you were to cross that bridge and face that fear and do that thing that empowers you, that part of you that you've been watering for years gets kicked out.
Yeah.
And
yeah. And I think that's really powerful because it's the letting go, right? It's the letting go of the way you've been and how you've perceived things. You said something really important to me in that, which was the brain blank. The
stress
key.
weeds?
No, it was before the stress weeds. Oh no, so annoying. It was to do with
our state of being locks us in without us even knowing it.
That's it. Yeah. So it's the locked in, it's the being locked in. And when we get locked in, that becomes, certainty. And it's the certainty I wanted to catch on to that you just shared, because right now our world is very uncertain and it's confusing and it's very stressful for a lot of people. And what you just said touches in on the false paradigm of certainty. And I think it's really important because that's the kind of thing that holds you from ever being able to drop into that state of rest. Because that's a perception you want to keep. Because it makes you feel like you're stronger than you are, but you're not really strong. It's a false strength.
And there's so many things that would love to feed that and keep you locked in that state.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. I felt like that was something I really wanted to highlight because it's identifying. We can then go into all these things that we don't want to shift that prevent us from going into that state. But if the truth is that stopping yourself from going into that state stops you from accessing so much more goodness in your life, actually the deep stability that comes from listening to your intuition, listening to how that weaves with rational thinking. And that can guide you to getting the support, taking the right choices. That gives confidence and self-esteem and self-worth that nothing in the external world can take away from.
The peace that transcends all human understanding. Who knew we could give it to ourselves?
Yeah. Yeah. And it just comes through these tools that help us access that more restful place. And I know we've been talking about it from the yoga nidra perspective, but I'm also very mindful you and I first connected because we're both breathwork practitioners. And, you know, we both also have found that breathwork is another profound tool to help us access the state of rest and other things too. And so I'd really appreciate a bit more of your experience of how breathwork has fed into supporting your journey, your veterans' journey with those that you've worked with in moving through those different states of being in that oscillation.
What I've observed is our state of being is shaped by 2 golden 5-minute time periods. The 5 minutes going into rest and the 5 minutes getting out of bed. And most people don't know it, but they're poisoning themselves in that locked state of being, going to sleep with all these thoughts in your head about the way things should be, the way they are, and maybe I'm not enough, maybe I need more love, all these things. And then getting out of bed, that can be quite difficult for people as well. When I'm speaking in the veteran space, they talk about the vultures on the bedhead, that as soon as you get conscious, those vultures, those negative vultures want to dive into your head and take up all the space. And breath work is the key to transforming, the easiest key I know to transforming those 2 5-minute windows from poison into peace, power, connection. And I call it a phoenix moment in the mornings, because those negative vultures, they're always there. I'm still human. But if I can transform that negative vulture, you know, the old phoenix moment, burn it, something whole new comes out. But I wouldn't have had that raw material to work with if I didn't have those negative vultures. So I'm quite grateful for them, because that then prompts me to take the actions to transform that into my peace, power, connection for the day. You know, there's a whole lot of humility in understanding that. There is a whole lot of honesty in saying that, you know, you are human. We need to reconnect every day to that which serves us. And if I was to carry on just waking up with this negative stuff, and I got chronic injuries, chronic pain, these things are lived experiences daily for me. But once you can access those 2 5-minute periods, and my ease of choice for people that are possibly not ready for the meditation side of things, is breath work. It's a very easy win. You get relatively quick response from your own breath in those windows. And no one's making money from it. You know, like that's probably why you don't hear about it. So people soon discover that it's not a set of lungs that we own. It's a medicine cabinet with a lot of different shelves. And Chinese for thousands of years have been saying, if you can control your breath, you can control everything. Not just some things, everything. And it gets to a point where energy, it's either spiraling up, more energy wants more connections, more good things, or it's spiraling down. I feel low, I need something more. I feel bad, I need comfort. There's no holding ground in this, and no one's going to do this for you except you. The world we currently live in doesn't want you to be spiraling upwards, because then you don't need all the crap that they think is important. And my goal for all my clients is for them to leave the house knowing that they can chase the car, the stuff, the external world stuff, but they've given themselves the peace they're looking for. They've given themselves the power they're looking for, the love. They're not attaching some sense of inadequacy that will get fulfilled by the car, the relationship, the external world stuff. So for me, it's a very easy win having that breath in those critical moments, because if I've noticed, if I lose the first 5 minutes of the day, I've kind of lost the day. And I'm a pretty motivated dude, but if I can have that guided breath work on tap at the touch of a button, then that's when I can transform those negative vultures into these very peaceful, powerful, eagles that will help me soar through the day. And it's something that if we don't choose that, then the choice gets made for us. If I don't choose to transform that negativity, then the choice gets made for me. And then it's, shut up until I've had a coffee. That's a good day, right? On a bad day, I'm drinking alcohol and I'm an a-hole. And I know that's within me. And I have to humbly admit that I can be two completely different types of people dependent on my energy state.
Yeah. It reminds me, as you're talking about it being kind of the transition state and how it sets you up and how it sets you for the wind down of exactly what you were saying earlier on. It's like, I'm choosing to let the amygdala rule, or I'm going prefrontal cortex. Like, which choice am I making? Right. And, we can say we don't have a lot of choice with the external world, but we do have a choice about which default place we go from. And, the breath is the tool that we have in our body that we can consciously change. You can't sit there and tell your heart to beat faster or slower, but you can use your breath, and you can change the rhythm of your breath, the way you breathe, how you're breathing, to affect the nervous system. And that can prompt that shift in where you're operating from as a default system for the day. And also for winding down to have a better sleep. And so that to me kind of relates back to what you were saying earlier on about where the breath work then obviously is applying and helping people shift. What do you do? Like, people have different states, right? You can wake up one morning and feel really kind of like, oh, I don't want to get up. I don't want to do this day, full stop. And other times you're getting up and you're like, I'm going to attack the day. And so, it's not the same breathwork practice that someone's going to need each morning to set up their mood, right?
Yeah. And what you're talking about there is the quality of sleep people have. So when I work with people, I say, okay, let's define good quality sleep as when you wake up, man, I'm good. Man, I'm good. Okay. That's what good quality sleep will do for you. It's the best ever. And people kind of know this, but when I ask, okay, in the last 2 weeks, you can remember 2 weeks, how often have you gotten up and felt, oh man, that was good sleep. I am good. And you'll start to understand what a low standard we have as a collective for quality sleep. And so when people are fatigued, remember how I said low energy creates low energy? When I was in that low energy state, I had all these people saying, oh, you should do this, you should do that. I'm like, I know, but give me something I can access now. Oh my gosh, right? So you know how you said you've got to go to that place to help other people get out of it. So what what I understand is people don't need an extra 6 things to remember before going to sleep. Because when they're going to sleep, they're like, I just want to get to sleep, right? So what I've created as an option is a little button they can press on their phone that guides their sleep, a little notification. And I know I don't do something if something doesn't go, hey, do you remember this? Do you remember to do that? Oh, okay, yeah. And then I do it. So that repetition restores. And especially in the morning times, I'm a pretty motivated guy, but when I'm just waking up and those negative vultures are starting to jumping in my head, if I can push that button and that'll say breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And even though there's a conscious part of my brain going, this is BS, it's not going to work, bit by bit by bit by bit, my whole state is changing. So it's one thing to say this, it's another thing to create ease of access. So when I created breathwork in bed, all I wanted people to do is say when they want to sleep, when they want to wake up, and then we take care of the rest. So yes, there's a variety of tracks you can choose from, energetic, slow, all that sort of stuff. But the key is actually doing it and getting that nourishment, getting that connection to your breath. And it's the ease of access that makes all the difference. Because I'm sure there's better and worse ones to do, but the one you actually do is the one that's the best thing for you. And then you can sort of, get picky through the day with once you've, reached a certain energetic level. But I found it's the ease of access to the positive stuff that makes all the difference, especially going into your unconscious and then coming out of your unconscious.
Love it. Yeah. And I think that is the key to start, is just to do, right? And then, I know that, sometimes people have fed back over the years on some of my yoga nidras, wasn't for me, that, your English voice is really annoying, whatever, people want to say. And what I've learned is that I trust the process, that them doing it is the most important thing. Whether I irritate someone and my practice was not what they wanted, it served them, because whatever it's triggered is part of the growth, right? Whatever the irritation is part of their unfolding. It's not my practice is irritating, although it might be. Other people like it, some people don't. So there you go. It just depends on what serves. And so same with the breath work. Sometimes you land on the practice and it makes you feel calm, and other times you're landing on a practice and it makes you more irritated. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because it's helping your system release the irritation, the stress, it's bringing it up to the surface, because there's a reason you need to see the bad mood. So it's not always appropriate that we just do something to calm ourselves and make us feel really nice and lovely. It might be you've woken up that day, you need that slightly irritating practice so that you can see, more of what your default mode is of being angry and agitated at the world, so that when you get to the end of the day, you can reflect and go, okay, hang on a minute, that was interesting. Like, I've just seen myself in a different place, in a different state, and how I interact with the world from there. And so, it's not always, especially at the beginning, important that things make you feel good and calm and lovely. Sometimes we need to allow some of that energy to move.
Yeah. Removing blockages that we're willingly hanging on to, people fight tooth and nail for that. Because you made me feel annoyed, so I'm not going to remove this blockage. That's the ultimate victim language. Whenever I say you made me feel, I'm like, okay, Tim, you're making yourself a victim when you say that. And what is it that you're hanging on to? And what I like about breath work is it's got a mechanical property to it that goes beyond my own thinking power. So every element has a particular nature to it. Breath, air can't be held. Can't grab the air, right? So when we breathe it in a medicinal way, it doesn't allow us to hold on to any physical tension. It doesn't allow us to hold on to any mental tension. And I've fought my breath in the times, the times when you need it the most is often when there's the most resistance. And I'll show you, I'll share an open personal moment where this really showed up. So I'd just gotten divorced, COVID divorce, lost house, home, regular access to kids, sleeping on the couch of my parents' place. And you can bet at 2 a.m., the stress weeds in my head were getting a big feed. They were loving it. And the irony was, even though I knew as a breathwork person, breath would give me peace and get my power back, these stress weeds had me so locked into a place I couldn't do it. Even though I knew if I did that, that would give me peace, my state of being was so locked in that it owned me. And I was about to get off the couch and do alcohol, pills, self-harm, possibly all three. And then I said, Tim, you can take one breath. Take one fucking breath. And I drove that thumb into my chest and went, and it felt like the first breath coming up from the bottom of the ocean. This is working. Take two. I took 2 fingers, drove it into my chest. Okay, this is working, Tim. Keep going, finger by finger, breath by breath. Get to 10, get to 15. And then somewhere between breath 15 and breath 20, the mechanics of the nature of air didn't allow me to hold those stress weeds in my head. They got kicked out. And the rest of my brain came online and said, Tim, thank goodness you kicked the stress weeds out. This is working. Don't stop. And I thought, look, this actually really works. But to me, I needed like a guidance from the outside for me to access that breath in those states. And that was when I started making these stupid recordings of my own voice going, hey, Tim, breathe in, breathe out, because I could do that. But if I had to do it myself, I really struggled because the stress weeds had me locked down. And then I started sharing it with my mates and they're like, Tim, this is working. And I thought, well, instead of just going to sleep, how about we do ones to, because there is a specific type of breath to turn your bed into a cloud. There is a specific kind of breath to turn it into a trampoline in the morning. So I started making these 2 kinds of breath work and it just kept working. And then I started doing, workshops on these army bases and I'd get these emails from these high ranking officers saying, Tim, I had my corporals and sergeants coming up to me saying that was the first good night's sleep they had in 3, 4, 5 years. And he thought it was awesome, but I'm like, that's terrible. You know how much damage can be caused by 5 years of not sleeping? And how easy was it to fix? But what he said next stopped me in my tracks and withdrew me from public life for 2 years because everything I do has to pass a 3P test. It's got to be powerful. It's got to be positive. But the last P is most important. It's got to be permanent. Because if we say we're healers, we can't just have things good when you're there, live in concert. You've got to care about people the next day, the next week, the next year. We've got to give them access to this powerful and positive stuff. So that's when I, withdrew from public life for 2 years, spent a whole lot of money, and I created the Breathwork in Bed app where it just has that guidance 5 minutes before sleep, 5 minutes after sleep. And then I could say, look, I'm actually fulfilling on my mission that if people choose to, they've got permanent access to something that I've introduced them to. Yes, I've introduced you to, but what have I done to allow you to continually access that?
I love that. And it's so practical and, keeping things super simple, like you say, the repetition so that it becomes normal so that you can start to see the shift by keeping up the regularity of the practice. And I guess one thing that came to me when you were telling the story about yourself and that 2 a.m. was what you'd referred to earlier on about the Chinese always knowing the importance of breath, because the lung meridian is in Chinese medicine, sits with the element of metal. So air and the lung are metal, and metal is our season of autumn, of wisdom, of letting go. And when we let go of what's not relevant, we see where the wisdom really arises. And emotionally, it's the grief of something no longer being there. But the transformation from grief is actually faith, is that leap of faith into the unknown, that trust in jumping into the void and not knowing who you're going to become or what life's going to become. And that's what you were reminding me of when you're telling that story of like, no, I can I can come to my breath, right? And I can move beyond this pattern that's holding me unwise, right? In inability to sleep, keeping me awake with racing mind, too many thoughts, too many weeds, to find my own true wisdom that actually takes me forward with the confidence and the trust that I can navigate. Where am I going to live? What am I going to do next? And that it will come when the time is right and when I'm ready.
Yeah, that's really well put, Nid. Because all those negative states, I was very familiar with them. I was familiar with feeling angry, grieving, loss. It's everyone else's fault. But what I wasn't familiar with was being gentle on myself, letting that stuff go, and going into that place of complete unfamiliarity. And I'm pretty sure in some other realities, Tim didn't breathe that night and he just kept drinking, cranky middle-aged man, blaming others.
Yeah. But we're grateful you're in this reality and that you did take those breaths, and that led you to create a simple app with practices for people. You know, it took you on this path to help other people experience that power that breath can help them set up and close their day in a more positive way.
You know, and Nid, you're just, you know, when you're in something, you can't see it as clearly. So when I'm hearing you say back to it, I'm just seeing this timeline that I was on, and it was just 20 breaths at the right moment that then changed that timeline to something else completely. So the question I ask is, you know, how many people out there could those 20 breaths make a difference to? And I'm talking, you know, I don't even know if I'd still be here if I didn't take those 20 breaths. I'm a pretty tough, determined dude to hang on to what I'm familiar with, and what I was familiar with wasn't exactly working. And it was literally just 20 breaths. Yeah, a finger at a time, you know. And yeah, well said. Thanks for presencing me to that.
You're welcome. My privilege. Yes. So you've talked about breathwork in bed, and obviously we'll pop the link below for people to get the app so that they can access it and join you and your wonderful voice in breathwork in bed. And so I love to close these conversations with a simple question, which is, what lights you up?
Generosity. So I've noticed energy naturally spirals up, and there comes a point where you want to be generous with others, you know? So I thought, we get so much bad news in the world. Wouldn't it be good to get good news about the people being generous? Because, you know, there's good people out there, but they don't get any of the attention. So just after I sent you that little video message, because I knew I was going to be on your podcast and I wanted to get my body ready, so I went to the gym early, and I'm walking barefoot home, getting my grounding, and I'm crossing this bridge over this river with steep, you know, sides, and I see at the bottom there's a shopping trolley that someone had thrown in the river. And I thought, okay, that is going to be my act of generosity, because acts of generosity don't have to be to people, they can be to the environment. And they don't have to cost you anything. I mean, I just happen to be blessed with a very physical body, so I can go down that steep embankment and wrestle that trolley out, and I can weather the looks of, you know, all the mums pushing their trolleys. There's this guy, you know, pushing this weed-covered trolley along like I'm some homeless dude. But because generosity lights me up so much, I had to have it as like a public thing. So within the actual Breathwork in Bed app, we have what's called the generosity news wall, where people post up their acts of generosity, because I believe energy always seeks to connect. and we can connect to ourselves. That's great, but I think that's only half the connection. When we connect outside of ourselves, that's when the full loop happens. That's when you can double your energy, and oh my gosh, it's so great to be in that space of energetic abundance.
Beautifully said. So true. And it reminds me of the Buddhist way of teaching that, when consciousness wants to experience, which we may perceive as energy, it can only experience in relationship. So we constantly need relationship in order to experience. And that's why we're in relationship with everything. And so that generosity can be with anything, because that's the consciousness that's being brought to it. And so just really tapping into that nature of what it is to experience being is that generosity that you've just shared. So thank you so much. That's a beautiful, beautiful lighting up. So feeling tapping into generosity today, and your generosity and the time to come and chat and share in such a humble and powerful way. Thank you so much, Tim, for today. And I'm just really, really grateful for our connection and for sharing that with those that listen and jump into this recording. If there's anything else you'd like to share as a final farewell?
Thank you for your gift of Yoga Nidra. So many times over the past few years, I've had your tracks on loop, and I am really looking forward to the one you spoke about, the one that's like an 8-hour track. So
it's up. It's on Insight Timer. It's on Insight Timer. The 8 hours is there. Someone did say they didn't like the fact that I still guide it, that you're in the Shavasana position. You don't have to be, but it helps the brain relax when there's symmetry. So I kept that in to support the capacity to actually drop into that deeper state of restfulness by being in symmetry. But obviously, if your body can't be, don't be. But yeah, it's up on Insight Timer. So the 8-hour recording is available on Insight Timer, and there'll be the 1-hour version on YouTube, I'm afraid.
Spotify?
Restrictions. It'll be the 1-hour version on Spotify as well,
Okay.
I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, I can put that on loop. That's fine. No worries.
Yeah. So the 8-hour version is edited so that as it repeats, you don't end the Yoga Nidra practice and come out of it. But the 8-hour version will also be in my app. It's one of those things with music licensing. So that's why it's on Insight Timer and it will be in my app. But I'm afraid it won't be on Spotify or YouTube. The 1-hour version of it will be. But yeah, there's a whole 8-hour Yoga Nidra practice. I sent it over for testing with an award-winning audio producer who gave me a thumbs up that it was okay for me to share it. So I'm very grateful to them also for giving me that feedback as well before I published it. So yeah, that is available for you to jump into, and I'll make sure I put that in the show notes too, but I'll send it to you, Tim.
Yeah, and I do want to say this out loud because I've had a great conversation, but there's obviously been a lot of people listening to this. Some people will treat this like, oh, it was a good conversation, no worries. But other people will go, okay, there's actually some real gold here that I can integrate into my life, and my life will be forever altered. And I think if those people are listening, really take away something from this conversation that you can permanently align yourself up to, because I'm pretty sure that's the reason why Nid has this podcast, and that's the reason why I felt so wanted to be on it.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, there's the resonance that happens as we're sharing, that trusting that it supports those that need to hear whatever aspects of the conversation are that we've had. And should you need support on any of the things that we've touched on, please reach out to Tim or I. So that you can have that support. I know that both of us are very alive in that generous kind of nature to want to support people if you reach out to us. So yeah, that invitation stands as well. Thank you, Tim. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful day.